Welcome to the 8th edition of my Pug Fireball and Company podcast, where I focus on America's pastime, both past and present. Are you ready to be entertained, informed, and intrigued by stories of memorable players and epic games? I'm your host, Steve, and today we're talking with John Pregler of Dubuque, Iowa, a Dubuque baseball expert, a Society for American Baseball Research member, and an author. John's latest work about Charles A. Comiskey appears in the current issue of the Iowa History Journal. Comiskey played baseball and lived in Dubuque and helped form the American League in 1901. Comiskey also owned the Chicago White Sox from 1901 to 1931, built Comiskey Park, and was elected to the Baseball Hall of Fame in 1939. John's other works include an article about American League co-founder Tom Loftus of Dubuque in the spring 2020 Baseball Reference Journal published by SABR, and an article about the evolution of the American League for the fall 2022 Baseball Research Journal. I met John for the first time at the Dubuque Baseball Classic in the spring of 2024, an event he helped put together. Good evening, John.
Good evening, Steve. Thanks for having me.
Did you play baseball in high school and or college?
I did not. I was not talented or gifted, but I did play independent league and appeared in one or two games in the Holy Name League around Dubuque. I was a semi-fastball player in my teens, and we did very well there, but no hardball, unfortunately.
How long have you been a member of SABR?
It's approaching 10 years now, so I probably joined in 2016.
Oh.
But I've been a lifelong baseball fan like all of us.
I joined in the fall of 2014. So when did you get interested in Dubuque's professional baseball history?
Growing up, I had a next-door neighbor, an older gentleman who served in World War II, and he worked on small engines, and I'd go over and sit evenings with him while he was working and fixing small engines or repairing an old Indian motorcycle, and just listen to him tell stories. And he always told stories about three Dubuque athletes that were kind of the superstars of Dubuque. The first being Jay Berwanger, the first Heisman Trophy winner. The other being Red Faber, the Hall of Fame pitcher. And the third one being Charlie Comiskey. So I really started to learn about and get interested at a very young age, and then I would hear my father and his brothers and the other next door neighbors talk about baseball and Comiskey, and we had some diehard White Sox fans in the neighborhood, so they definitely liked Comiskey.
I guess maybe in a way you've answered it, but why did you become interested in Dubuque's professional baseball history?
Just because I'm interested in Dubuque history in general, especially history that ties to kind of national themes, whether it's Civil War or professional baseball. And just learning, early on that we had a Hall of Famer that started his career in Dubuque, actually two of them. Charlie Comiskey really intrigued me because it's not that well known. It's not like when you drive into town, you see signs, and if you ask the average person, they would be clueless in most cases as to that fact. Although they're all familiar with Comiskey Park in Dubuque, which is named for Charlie Comiskey during his lifetime, but most people don't make that connection.
Dubuque appears to be overlooked when it comes to professional baseball history. Why is that?
One, because I think we as a city quit growing in population. Really, in the fees and fees, we kind of leveled out at 50,000, and it wasn't until more recently, the last 20 years, that we jumped up to 60,000. And while we were strong in early professional baseball in the 19th century and the beginning of the 20th century, other communities just kept on growing and Dubuque didn't. So professional baseball just kind of suffered because of it in that regard.
So it's kind of surprising there are no signs really as you get into Dubuque about the Comiskey and all the history. I'm kind of surprised. Has there ever been an effort to put up more signs, or?
There was last year painting because we have gorgeous murals
Yeah.
all over Dubuque, downtown Dubuque, and there was one celebrating Comiskey in the American League that was put up for the last MLB at Field of Dreams game. Unfortunately, that was painted over. It was a gorgeous mural, and I thought they should have kept it.
Why did they paint it over?
Just because it's a particular spot that they update it with different themes of events that are being championed for that particular year in Dubuque.
Without giving too much away, why is Charles A. Comiskey so important to Dubuque's professional baseball history?
Well, it's really the significance Dubuque played in Charlie's life. He, as a young man, was sent to a Catholic school by his father in Prairie du Chien, Wisconsin. And he had already been introduced to baseball prior to that, but he got on the team's or the college's baseball team and spent more time playing ball and talking about baseball than his studies. So his father sent him to a different Catholic school in Kansas, thinking that maybe I send him further west, he'll get away from baseball and pay attention to his studies. And he ran into and became friends with Ted Sullivan, who's generally regarded as the father of the minor leagues, or at one time was. And so it really, that drew Charlie to Dubuque when Sullivan got a franchise for the Western News Agency selling confectionery goods, tobacco, and reading materials on the Illinois Central Railroad and at the depot. So he brought Charlie to Dubuque after they had played baseball together. And so Charlie was still a very young, impressionable young man, liked baseball, but his first professional league and professional contract was in Dubuque in 1879. So his first 4 years of playing baseball, now he played baseball before that and even was paid to do so, but not in a league and not under professional contract. So Dubuque was that first one, the Northwest League in 1879. And it's really where he came in as a pitcher originally, but he had a rubber arm. And they also had Hoss Radburn, the future Hall of Famer, pitching, so they really didn't need Charlie on the mound. So they put him on first base, and that's where Charlie got into some of the early science of baseball and made a significant change in the game based off of what he was doing in Dubuque. And that's the way people play first base.
Yeah, according to your story, he played off the bag, which was very unusual. He might have been the first to do it, to play off the bag instead of just being stationed at the bag. Am I right?
That's correct. Yeah, everybody, the first baseman stayed on the bag when the ball was hit and then waited for the throw to them. And the second baseman would be responsible for anything to the first baseman's right. And Charlie got the idea to not only play off the bag, but then coordinate and work with the pitcher to have the pitcher cover when he had to move to his right to get a ball and couldn't get back to first base. So they were actually, him and Ted Sullivan were practicing that near the train yards here in Dubuque in 1879, and they started incorporating it in games in Dubuque in 1880 and 1881 before Charlie got called to the St. Louis Browns. So, and that's right where the harbor in Port of Dubuque is, right under the Julian Dubuque Bridge that crosses over into Illinois. So right in that area, Charlie and Sullivan in their time off would be out there, and Sullivan would be hitting balls to Comiskey, and they had a brick that they used as first base, and he'd rove to his right to catch the grounders, and then Sullivan, pretty soon after they came up with the idea, would cover first, and like I said, then they would incorporate it in their games. Because Sullivan was a periodic pitcher for the Dubuque team.
Who was Tom Loftus? I know he's another very well known, at least in Dubuque.
Well, actually,
personality.
Tom Loftus is the best kept secret in baseball and Dubuque. Well, as I was researching Comiskey and just some of his early playing history related to Dubuque and the 1879 Dubuque Rabbits that won the first year of the Northwestern League in its pennant, I came across Tom, and Tom was a St. Louis kid who played for the St. Louis National League team in 1870 seven or 76, and then again for the team in 77, and then he managed and played for a Peoria traveling pro team in 78 and played against Dubuque. And Ted Sullivan ended up, when he co-founded the Northwest League, which Saber considers the second ever professional baseball league, by the way. And it was run out of Dubuque's Baseball Emporium, is what Sullivan and Loftus had a billiards hall and cigar shop on Main Street to help make money and support their baseball habits. And they ran the Northwest League out of that office there. Sullivan or Loftus's name just kept on coming up as this individual who was 5 years older than Comiskey, but a little bit younger than Sullivan. That was the captain on the field, was really had a business mind about baseball and financially running a team, but also knew how to manage players and get them to cohese as a team. So he ended up going back to the St. Louis Browns of the American Association along with Sullivan in 1883 after Comiskey joined St. Louis in 1882 for that first year of the American Association.
Now to listen to my other podcasts with such guests as Sam Bernardine, Randy Wayhofer, and Jason Kent of the Iowa Cubs and Toronto Major League, Jim Larson, Larry Brown, and Rich Nine. Go to my Puck Fireball and Company podcast on YouTube. You can also get my latest book, Puck Fireball and Company, 16 Years of Professional Baseball, by going to https://puckfireball.com. Doing a fun fact from the book in this podcast, and I picked April 1970. The reason that's significant is 20-year-old Vida Blue struck out 14 Oklahoma City batters in his AAA debut for the Iowa Oaks at Sick Taylor Stadium in Des Moines. In the process, Blue broke the one-year-old franchise record of 12 strikeouts in a single game, and he still holds at least a couple of franchise strikeout records, even though that was like 55 years ago he played here. But I still run into people, lifelong Des Moines residents, who remember seeing Vida Blue and those Gene Tennis, Joe Rudy, those guys that were part of the Oakland A's world champions in the 70s play here in Des Moines at the old Sick Taylor Stadium. Now I'll get back to speaking with John here. Why is Loftus so important to Dubuque's professional baseball history?
Well, and Loftus and Comiskey became lifelong best friends, and you see throughout all the sporting papers and newspapers, paper columns or sporting editions and whatnot throughout Loftus's life, how those two coexist and best friends. They had joint ownership together in Chris Vonderay's St. Louis Whites, which was kind of used as a minor league to the St. Louis Browns in 1888. And they had worked then together and both mentored Ban Johnson. So Loftus ended up being a manager of the Milwaukee team in the United Association there, or the Union Association, I should say, in 1884. And him and Ted Sullivan were both managers of team, Sullivan of Kansas City, and they were both living in Dubuque. And the league collapsed at the end of the year, and Henry Lucas, who had founded it out of St. Louis, didn't even show up for the closing meeting. And out of that meeting, Loftus and Sullivan, and then the representatives from the Washington Nationals, Nationals. So Milwaukee, Kansas City, and Washington were the only three teams of the 6 or 8 of the league that actually showed up to close out and have the winter meeting, decided that they would start their own new league the following spring, and they created in 1885 the Western League, and that was Sullivan and Loftus. And then that took a year off in 1886 and came back in 1888 when Loftus and Comiskey went in 50-50 or 25-25 for 50% of the St. Louis Whites, and Vanderhey put in the other 50%. So they had that relationship, and Loftus went on to manage the Cleveland National League team in 1889, and then went on to manage the 1890 Cincinnati Reds. And he managed them for a couple years, took them into the National League from the AA. But at that time, Loftus became a mentor to a young sports editor by the name of Ban Johnson. After Loftus in 1892 decided to retire from baseball and focus on his businesses back in Iowa because of an economic depression that was hitting the United States, Charlie Comiskey replaced him as manager of the Cincinnati Reds in 1892 and continued to mentor Ban Johnson for a couple more years, and then they got him elected as president of the Western League, which Loftus helped founded about a decade earlier, 9 years earlier. And then Comiskey the following year bought a team in the Western League, and the year after that, Loftus bought a team in the Western League, and so Johnson, Loftus, and Comiskey were really the triad that ran the Western League and grew it to compete with the National League, especially from 1896 up to 1900. So that's where Loftus's importance really comes in, and I was constantly reading about him. And when I wrote my article, Tom Loftus, the American League's Forgotten Founding Father, it went through the blind peer review, and several of the peer reviewers came back and said, I've always saw his name and heard about him and knew that he had some significance, but never quite made the connection. I figure that he did not get his rightful due because he died early. He died before the age of Ruth. He died in 1910, and by that time, Ban Johnson and Charlie Comiskey were starting to have verbal wars in the press, and each one wanted to be looked at as the individual and single founding father of the American League that did it all single-handedly. Of course, that was not the case. Ban Johnson did not found the Western League or do it all by himself. He took the lead of Charlie Comiskey and Tom Loftus and Jimmy Manning in Kansas City, who was a former professional player that turned into a motor magnet. It was those guys collectively, and Kalia and Connie Mack in Milwaukee, the Kalia brothers, that were the driving force between, let's put our money, Ban Johnson, to take on the National League, because Ban didn't have skin in the game. It was all the magnates and all the team owners whose money was on the line, and it was them that guided them. And so they started meeting in Dubuque on a regular basis in 1896 for Western League meetings, and in 1898 they decided to pull the trigger and take on the National League head-to-head.
This kind of anticipates one of my next questions. So, can you explain the Hotel Julian's link to the founding of the American League? I believe this is where they had some of the meetings, and that hotel is still there, of course.
So, Tom Loftus, his financial wealth came from all of his business dealings around Dubuque. He made money on land and mining. Him and Ted Sullivan had invested in lead mining, and they struck a big vein and made some very good money off of that. He had always owned taverns and became partners with a gentleman in several taverns, and then they took over a liquor distributorship. And so he had several taverns, land interest, liquor distributors, and then he ran lunch counters in hotels and business offices in Dubuque, all at the same time going on. Besides owning a baseball team and managing and doing baseball through the season professionally. That's where he really made his wealth in Dubuque.
But Hotel Julian is where some of the
And
meetings were held, wasn't it?
yes, and so Tom owned the lunch counter and ran the lunch counter in the Hotel Julian. So when Comiskey would come, first off, Charlie Comiskey and Loftus both married Dubuque girls. So that was one of the things that kept Charlie Comiskey connected to Dubuque and returning on a very frequent basis from 1878 until his death in 1932. Is because he married a Dubuque girl. Both of his sons were born in Dubuque. One of them, Charlie A. Comiskey Jr., is buried in Dubuque. Comiskey lived his full playing career in the off season in Dubuque. It wasn't until 1892 that he permanently moved his home from in the off season from Dubuque back to Chicago. Which he got a hankering to do after the 1890 Player Association or Player League, because he was with the Chicago Pirates in that one-year league.
Another name I think it plays a part in Dubuque's history is Clarence Pants Rowland. The reason I know that name, the only reason I know it, because he was a executive with the Chicago Cubs at one point, I think in the 50s. I have no idea how he got his name Pants. Maybe you can explain that. Who was he?
First off, there is another extremely fascinating and historically significant individual in the pantheon of professional baseball, covering a very long time, almost as long as Connie Mack had an imprint on baseball. So Pants Rollins, he was born over in Platteville, Wisconsin, and his dad served in the Iron Brigade during the Civil War. And then after the war and in the late 1870s, they moved to Dubuque for financial and economic opportunities and work. So Pants was just a little child when they moved to Dubuque. So he was raised when Comiskey and Quinn and Sullivan and Loftus and Cantillon and other major league names were playing in Dubuque and associated with baseball in Dubuque. And in the 1890s, Pants started to play with one of our pro teams as a catcher. Didn't have a lot of talent, but one day on the field, he was running and he was wearing his dad's pants, and they were too big and they kept on falling down on him. So they kept on calling him Pants, and he hated his name Clarence and actually preferred the nickname Pants, so preferred people call him that over Clarence. But he got to know Tom Loftus and was working at some of Tom's establishments and got to know Charlie Comiskey because Charlie would always be coming to Dubuque. And any sports men, whether it was John L. Sullivan or some of the boxing legends or billiards champions of the time, when they were in Dubuque, would always come visit one of Loftus's establishment. And if Comiskey was in town, they would hold court. And everybody would show up to talk to these guys and hear all the stories and whatnot. And so Pants got to know them and started to get mentored. And in 1903, he raised the money and bought the franchise rights to get Dubuque into the 3I League. And got Dubuque's professional baseball back up and running, which had been dead for about 2 years after they left the Western Association, which I think 1898 or 99 was the last year they played there. So Rollins got the Dubuque team up and then managed that a few years and then managed Peoria and Aberdeen. And then recommended players to Charlie Comiskey like Red Faber, who Comiskey had not heard of, who turned out to be a Hall of Famer, and other things. And one day Comiskey finally gave Rollins a shot to manage his Chicago White Sox. And of course, from 1915 through the end of 1918, Rollins managed the White Sox, and every year, those first 3 years, the record improved, and eventually they won the World Series in 1917. Rollins managing it, and Red Faber won 3 of the 4 games. So, two Dubuquers really dominated that 1917 World Series, or or people with Dubuque ties. And then after that, he went on to own minor league teams. He was also a umpire for a while in the American League because Comiskey fired him because the White Sox took a tumble in 1918, but that's because most of their best players went off to support the war effort. And so he replaced them with Kid Gleason, and then you had the 1919 Black Sox. And Ray Schalk always said that if Red Faber, who had the Spanish flu in 1919 during the World Series and did not play, he said if he would have been healthy, there would have never been a Black Sox scandal. He also thinks that if Rollins was around, there would have been a much more disciplined team in 1919 like there had been prior. Pansy went on to become President Wrigley, who owned the Cubs at the time, also owned the California Angels in the Pacific League, made Rollins the president of that team, gave him some ownership, and then Rollins became president of that league, the Pacific Coast League, and took it up to and actually tried in the between 1954, 55 and almost successfully turned the Pacific Coast League into a third major league. And there were a lot of winter meetings where that was the top topic on the agenda. And there were discussions and then agreements to, well, you're not a minor league, but you're not a major league. And, we won't come in and steal your players like Joe DiMaggio and other who played for the San Francisco Seals in the Pacific Coast League. And we'll give you other considerations until you're big enough to have enough cities to support it. And then immediately after that, after he got very close to some successful votes, you saw the Dodgers quickly make a deal to play in Wrigley, the first Wrigley Field, which was in Los Angeles. And they made that deal with the A's, and then that did away with that dream. And then after that, Wrigley brought Rollins into Chicago and made him a VP of the Cubs. He helped bring in people like Buck O'Neill, integrate the Cubs, and was just a great scout and was an executive till 1968 with the Cubs when he passed away. So just had this long and storied career. And Ty Cobb absolutely hated him. Said he was going to quit baseball if Rollins came in and managed Detroit. I think that was around 1923 or 4. And Ruth thought he was an odd fellow when he was an umpire because he was always so polite to him and everything, Called him out one time and apologized. Oh, he's just a fascinating character.
Do you know if a bio has been written about him for Saber?
It's not really detailed and doesn't cover all this. It's definitely something he warrants a biography or at least a couple chapters, which I'm trying to address in a current project I'm working on.
Well, why is June 23rd, 1914 a significant date in Dubuque's professional baseball history? I'll give you a hint. They had a special day.
Yeah, that's Charlie Comiskey Day in Dubuque. And we had opened up a brand new professional baseball stadium, and it was believed to be the first municipally funded professional baseball park in the United States, down on 4th Street in Dubuque, and was our professional field up until the last Dubuque Packer team in 1976. Charlie had bought a big flagpole and put it in. And donated a flag, and then we had Charlie Comiskey Day, and he came over and brought the White Sox over for an exhibition game. And ironically, that field replaced the prior league field, which was a pro field in a different section of town that was built in 1895 by Tom Loftus, with help of the very first game played in that stadium. Comiskey brought his St. Paul Saints, which would go on to become the Chicago White Sox, to Dubuque to play Loftus's Dubuque Colts. And so Comiskey had history with the prior professional stadium as well.
And if I got this right, the White Sox beat the Dubuque Hustlers 11-2. So who were the Dubuque Hustlers?
Yeah, that was our 3I. And Comiskey came back 2 more years, 15 and 16. And in 15 and 16, Rollins and Faber were with the team. And in 2016, guy by the name of Joe Jackson also happened to be with the team. And Joe went 3 for 5 in Dubuque, 30 miles from the Field of Dreams, about 70 years before the movie was ever made.
So who are the Dubuque Packers? What league do they play in, and where do they play in Dubuque?
So we had a lull or absence of professional baseball in Dubuque in the 1950s. So we had a local group led by Johnny Petrakis and others who made the charge to get professional baseball back in Dubuque and down at that 4th Street ballpark that Charlie Comiskey was at in 1914. And so Petrakis, working with Charlie Comiskey II, who was head vice president of the Chicago White Sox minor league system, signed an affiliation with Dubuque and created an A, or it would be considered A ball today. It was D ball back then because they had A, B, and C and D leagues instead of triple A and rookie league like we do today. So that started in the Midwest League, and they existed from 1954 through 1976 with a couple years off in the early 70s because of we were building a flood wall where the professional park was because of major Mississippi River flooding a few years prior, so they had to take a couple years off. But Johnny Petrakis was the president of our local baseball association. He was elected minor league executive of the year in 1956 by Sporting. Branch Rickey received the honor for the major league executive of the year along with Petrakis because the Dubuque team was setting attendance records for D-ball. Places like St. Petersburg, Florida had less attendance for their minor league team than Dubuque did. And Petrakis just had the community buzzing for baseball and really supporting the team. And it helped that we had people like Deacon Jones in 1956 hit 409. The first person since Ted Williams in pro baseball to hit over 400 with over 300 at-bats or something in the season to qualify. And Gary Peters, who went on to be the Rookie of the Year and an all-star in the major leagues, was on that team as well, as who was the catcher for the 1969 Miracle Mets, my Met.
So who are some of the other famous Dubuque players who had successful careers in the major leagues?
So you had people like Gary Peters and Martin from the Sox system. And then the late 50s, it was the Pirates. So Jerry Blass and a couple other people that were on the 1970-71 Pirate World Series teams started their careers in Dubuque. 1961, there were two gentlemen, the two Tommies. Tommy Agee, who was one of two bonus babies on the team, received a signing bonus out of high school to play D-ball. Other rookie that year starting his first professional contract was Tommy John, who went, I think it was 14-3 that year for Dubuque in 1961.
Do those
And
guys
then the
ever
next year, go ahead.
did those guys ever come back to Dubuque?
That they have not, and I've reached out here recently because next year's the 50th anniversary of the last Dubuque team, which included Bruce Bochy in 1976. And, in 1965, Joe Rudy played in Dubuque. The 1968 Dubuque Packers were the first minor league team of the Kansas City Royals, who played their first season in 1969 the following year. So once they got their franchise awarded to them in January of 1968, the first thing they did was try to get a farm system going to start developing talent. They knew they had the draft, but they knew they'd need more players. So Dubuque was their very first farm system. No one in Dubuque, though, made the minors from the 68 team. And then probably the last big name that came out of Dubuque was Bruce Bochy in 1976. Terry Poole played here a couple of years, but Terry wasn't as good of a player as, say, a Joe Rudy or a Tommy Agee, but people know his name because he's more recent.
So are you working on another projects such as the Dubuque Baseball Classic or working on another article for Sabre?
I'm not working on an article for Sabre, although I've done a couple peer reviews here recently for the Baseball Research Journal for them. I am looking at trying to organize another baseball symposium or Dubuque Baseball Classic for next year. I would like to try to bring in a couple ex-Dubuque Packers. I would love to get someone like Tommy John or Joe Rudy or Bruce Bochy to come in and speak at it. So I'm looking to do something there. I'd like to hold it all out at the Field of Dreams this year if they're or not this year, but when we do it next year if they're agreeable. And hopefully they'll be having another major league game there in the near future.
Yeah, well keep us posted on that. That really sounds interesting. Had a real good time at the first Classic in Dubuque, and that's a neat part of the state. A lot of people don't realize how hilly it is up there, but you've got great views of the Mississippi River and whatnot. And it's a city in Iowa, I believe.
A lot of Native American ancient burial mounds in the area that are 1,800 to 2,000 years old. Similar to effigy mounds up north of us. We have them all along our bluffs here. A lot of old Civil War history around Dubuque and Iowa as well. As a matter of fact, I have a letter I procured earlier this year from a Iowa Civil War soldier mustering in to service in the 26th Iowa, and I want to say they were either in Keokuk or Burlington at a camp there, a mustering center. And he's writing home to Newton, Iowa, to his wife, talking about how they were trying to kill time, how boring it was, and how they were playing baseball. And this is 1961, 62, or 1861, 62. Yes, yeah. Thank you. And part of the thesis I'm working on is the question is what really was the cause and the spread of baseball? Was it the Civil War? Was it newspapers? Was it the railroad? What was it? And it really was New Yorkers is what it was. First through the printed word, because all publishing, even today, goes through New York City, so that's why the New York game was talked about more, and the Brooklyn games and those types of things than the Massachusetts game or the Philadelphia Town Ball game. And then you had railroad individuals. When I look at Dubuque's history and its rich railroad history, by 1955, we had New York societies, the Excelsior societies in Dubuque, with 20, 30 businessmen and their sons, members, all from the state of New York. I have a reference. We don't have the smoking gun, and John Leopa, I know sometimes it gives him a cringe when I say that realistically, Dubuque in 1855 was probably the first time baseball was played in Dubuque. Now, the newspaper article we have that demonstrates the first known time is 1859 in Davenport. But we have references in old newspapers and in a county book published in 1870, which clearly just went through the newspaper year by year and took out almost word by word items of things that went on around the county, day by day, month by month, across several years. And I have where I've aligned Civil War history or other political history word for word to the newspaper article. So I assume where they reference that there was this exhibition of baseball, not a competitive game, but an exhibition, happened in 1855. I believe it because there were a lot of New Yorkers in Dubuque because of the railroad. And so more than likely they were here bored and said, hey, yeah, let's see if we can't get a game of baseball going and show the town what it's about. No, and he's absolutely right. The first officially documented is Davenport. But there's enough empirical evidence that suggests. Now, what I can't find is newspapers from Dubuque from that time frame that I can go through page by page to discover and find that and proof it out. But I'm confident because it appeared in 1870. Then it was referenced in a local Telegraph Herald newspaper article in like 1903 or 1923. Again, not referencing the book, but that baseball was first played in Dubuque in 1855. Now, the first recorded game was 1863. And about 3 weeks before that, we also had a recorded game, a two-man cat being played in Dubuque.
Well, this has been quite interesting. Don't forget the Iowa Cubs start a 3-game homes against the Columbus Clippers tonight. The Clippers are the AAA affiliate of the Cleveland Guardians. I almost said Indians. Good evening, everyone, and thanks, John, for joining me on this podcast.
Thanks for having me.